Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
2100 hours. A very warm welcome to you to Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective, on this Thursday evening as we bring you a roundup of what's been happening in and around the African continent and beyond. Of course, we'll start in South Africa, where it's pretty much heating up. South Africans saying it feels like it's a movie. They're watching a movie, and we'll be telling you about what's been happening in crime intelligence amid reports of political interference and corruption within the police service. And we'll also be telling you about the Middle East peace process, how it seems that there has been some sort of breakthrough. And we'll also tell you about gender affirmation. What does it really mean and why is it controversial? All that coming up here on Africa World Hour this evening. Let's start with your top stories this hour. Now we start with this. South Africa suspended Deputy National Police Commissioner for Crime Detection, Shadrack Sibiya, saying that he feels betrayed by his colleagues after police raided Sibiya's home and confiscated laptops and cell phones. The raid comes after he was implicated in both the Madlanga Commission and Parliament's ad hoc committee inquiry into police corruption. Sibiya was addressing the media outside his home in Centurion, south of Pretoria.
I'm not angry, I'm hurt. I feel like Joseph, whose brothers actually threw him in the pit, and they ended up selling him, because I've been working with my colleagues and we've been working very well, but for my colleagues to turn on me the way they turned on me, that's beyond me.
So who betrayed you?
My colleagues betrayed me.
And of course, we will hear more about that. And this time we're talking about Police Minister Senzo Mchunu Chief of Staff Cedric Nkambinde, who says he's fearing for his life. This after what he calls a violent search and seizure at his flat last night by officers claiming to have been sent by the National Police Commissioner Fani Masemola. He says around 15 camouflaged officers with balaclavas stormed his flat in Midrand, north of Johannesburg, looking for laptops and other electronic items. Nkambinde says he was not home at the time and the police assaulted his brother thinking it was him. He says should anything happen to him, the National Police Commissioner must be held responsible.
They said we cannot go all the way from KZN for nothing. It means they will leave not a stone unturned until they found me. Maybe to really assault me because they assaulted the wrong person, thinking it's me. Maybe if it's me, it might be more than an assault. That is why I'm telling the public that anything happened to me, Masemola, the National Commissioner, General Masemola, as the one who sent this police to us, he will be responsible.
And the third African Union Studies and Annual Symposium enters its second and final day today. The symposium kicked off yesterday with scholars, policymakers and activists deliberating on AU's advances and what has been termed the new scramble for Africa, the African Union's role in addressing conflict, advancing reparations and securing Africa's resource sovereignty has come under the spotlight once again. Tamo Kapisa reports.
This symposium offers a timely and critical platform to reflect, reimagine, and reposition the AU and its member states in the face of contemporary global disruptions, regional alignments, and internal challenges. Thus, this symposium aims to interrogate the AU's role, responsibly, and potential in responding to the new scramble for Africa.
Israel's cabinet is due to meet after a landmark agreement was reached for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the remaining Israeli hostages. Ministers are expected to approve what they're calling the hostage liberation plan in exchange for the freeing of around 2,000 so far unnamed Palestinian prisoners. The BBC's Yolanda Nell explains the next steps.
It sets in trail this set of events now. We should have the Israeli Security Cabinet meeting in the afternoon. They have to give the approval to this deal before it is then voted on by the entire cabinet. But it is considered at this point, despite the criticism that's seen as inevitable from the Israeli Prime Minister's far-right allies, that the deal will go through. They have to approve the list of Palestinian prisoners that will be released from Israeli jails in exchange for the hostages. And then once that has happened, we should start to see the Israeli forces pulling out in Gaza. They should withdraw to the lines that have been agreed upon with Hamas.
And finally, operations on the ground continue in Gaza despite the announcement of a landmark agreement for a ceasefire. The plan, which was first announced by US President Donald Trump, includes a ceasefire that is expected to come into effect. And after the Israeli cabinet has approved it later today, hostages will also be exchanged in return for thousands of Palestinian detainees. Here's the BBC's Liz Doucette.
Still a very rocky road to peace, not just in Gaza, but across this region. But at least the journey has begun, and some of the details are still being argued over, including the names of the Palestinians prisoners to be released as part of this deal, and the big plumes of smoke rising from Gaza City, underlining that there still isn't a ceasefire. And on the ground, there are certain to be Palestinians who are asking, well, we heard about a ceasefire, why hasn't the operation stopped?
The Morning Switch Weekend with the Shy Guy.
The story that takes us to Zambia. There are two men actually that were sentenced to prison for the plot to kill the president with witchcraft. You go like, what? So these guys were arrested actually in Lusaka. And what was found on them was a live chameleon. Can you believe that? Animal tails and bottles of concoction. That takes us back to 1914, which is the Witchcraft Act. I can imagine now arrested and they go to jail for the next 2 years. You know, I presume that when you get to jail, they get to ask you actually, what is it that you committed? Now, this is the first of its kind, by the way, for somebody to be arrested for such. They in Pemba, whenever they pass, hey, Chikanga, hey, Uloya, hey, Mulosi. And imagine here, these early hours of the mornings, I get to talk about witchcraft.
Saturday and Sunday mornings belong to the Morning Switch. 3 to 6 a.m. Central African Time. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa. Just 7 minutes past 9, you are listening to Africa World Hour. $160 million tourism investment on the province of KwaZulu-Natal's north coast is set to become South Africa's most expensive resort development to date. The new Club Med South Africa, developed by the Collins Residential Consortium, is more than a leisure destination. We're told it's being positioned as a catalyst for inclusive and sustainable growth. Channel Africa's Lebogang Mabanga has more.
Almost 5 decades after Sun City transformed South Africa's tourism landscape, another game changer is emerging on KwaZulu-Natal's north coast. The new Club Med South Africa resort, financed through a partnership led by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, is being hailed as a model for destination-scale tourism and regional development. Anna Watkinson is the head of global finance for coastal regions at Absa CIB.
This project goes beyond leisure. It's designed as a catalyst for inclusive growth. By embedding local procurement, skills development, and renewable energy solutions, Club Med South Africa creates a sustainable ecosystem that benefits communities long after the resort opens.
She says the value of such projects lies in how they integrate with their surroundings, ensuring benefits flow beyond the resort walls.
It's about integration. When a resort connects to local supply chains, creates permanent jobs, and attracts complementary infrastructure, it transforms into a development asset. The key is aligning private capital with public objectives for shared value.
Watkinson explains that creating confidence for investors requires more than just vision. It depends on regulatory efficiency and collaborative financing models.
Certainty and speed are critical. Streamlined approvals, clear land use frameworks, and blended finance models reduce risk and unlock investor confidence. When policy and capital work together, destination-scale projects become viable.
Institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation have also been key players, providing what Watkinson calls patient capital, funds that allow long-term growth rather than quick returns.
It was pivotal. Institutions like the IDC provided patient capital and credibility, enabling private investors to commit. This partnership model demonstrates how collaboration can de-risk large-scale tourism projects and accelerate delivery.
As the Club Med project takes shape, attention now turns to where the next wave of destination-scale tourism could emerge across South Africa.
South Africa has untapped gems. Think Wild Coast, Garden Route, and parts of Limpopo, to name a few. To unlock them, we need infrastructure readiness, community engagement, and investor-friendly frameworks that balance sustainability with scale.
As South Africa positions itself for tourism-led recovery, the Club Med development is being seen as more than a holiday destination. It's a blueprint for inclusive growth, investor confidence, and sustainable tourism infrastructure. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Lebogang Mabange in Johannesburg, South Africa.
At 11 minutes past 9 from Johannesburg, South Africa, let's focus on a topic of much discussion. Of course, it has been for the last 2 years across the world, concern around what is happening in the Middle East. So after more than 2 years of conflict, tens of thousands of lives lost, widespread destruction and a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire. Under the first phase of the deal, hostages will be exchanged and Israeli forces will begin to withdraw to a pre-agreed yellow line. But how real is this ceasefire? Who gains? Who risks losing? And what will life look like in Gaza if the guns genuinely fall silent? Well, to answer these questions, we're joined now by academic researcher and analyst Thembisa Fakude. A very good evening to you, Thembisa, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So this process has been ongoing for years, if not decades, to reach this point. And we've seen the worst humanitarian crisis as a result thereof. But I want to find out, in your view, what are some of the unresolved conditions of this deal? We're saying it's the first phase. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that Benjamin Netanyahu can't be trusted. He has renegated in the past after making deals with the Palestinians via his mediators, the United States, and on the side of the Palestinians, Qataris and Egypt. So this time around, while those announcements were made, Israel was still bombarding Gaza. So we don't know precisely what's going to be happening, but there seemed to be some movement, and I'll only believe it when I see it, because at the moment, as we speak, the environment is not conducive to be transferring hostages from Gaza into Israel, because it's just simply unsafe. As I've said, Israel continues to bombard Gaza, notwithstanding that Trump announces a 20-point plan to achieve peace, but we don't see Israel moving towards ceasing the bombardment in Gaza and the annexation that's currently taking place in the West Bank.
And obviously timing is everything, and as you expressed doubt on whether or not peace will not only be upheld, but the commitments made, President Donald Trump has been very clear that he will achieve this milestone, but there's also his own personal interest in it. He's said he will be given a Nobel Peace Prize for his endeavors, not only in the Middle East but elsewhere as well. Is this what could have possibly led to both parties feeling the pressure, and how genuine is that in terms of internal and external political pressures?
Yeah, well, we're I think still very, very far away from the actual peace because there are so many other issues that are pending that require to be solved in Gaza, particularly the reconstruction of Gaza. The arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu has got a warrant of arrest from the ICC. The court case that the ICJ still continues. But more than anything else, we have thousands of Palestinians who are refugees way before October the 7th. And these are people in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and other countries who are stateless and who are looking at going back to their homes or driven out of their homes in 1948, 1967, 73, and all other wars that have since taken place, so forced Palestinians to flee their land. So that's another discussion that has to take place. Gaza itself is a large refugee camp. Many of people from Gaza come from what is now known as Israel. Many of them come from places such as Jaffa, which is now called Tel Aviv. They are looking at going back to their homes. You've got the illegal settlements that have continued to mushroom, not only after October the 7th, but even before that. And if you're going to be talking about the Palestinian state, for example, where are you going to construct that? Because at the moment, it's just practically impossible to have a state, given that we've got all of these illegal settlements in the West Bank in particular, that will prevent the Palestinian state from being constructed. So Donald Trump is doing it for his own convenience, business by and large. This is why you have his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, involved in this, because they see an opportunity for them to reconstruct Gaza into what he called the Riviera of the Middle East. But peace is just still too far away for us to even entertaining the discussion, because there's so many other issues that I've just mentioned that need to be solved before anything resembling peace can be achieved in that part of the world.
And what you mentioned is a very interesting, a curious fact, which I'm sure a lot of people have also speculated over: the presence of Jared Kushner, his presence there, and the impact of the quality of mediation support, bar the roles of Egypt, Qatar. What has been the impact, the influence on what is being offered as guarantees to both parties?
Well, at the moment, Hamas has got no guarantees, but Hamas is under pressure to disarm, Hamas is under pressure to disband its operation. So Hamas has got no guarantees. The only guarantees that they have are those, the hostages that are buried, because they have argued that rebel has to be cleared first before they can even recover those that were buried underneath those that were abducted by Hamas on October the 7th. So what you're going to see happening in the next couple of hours will be the release of those that are alive, and some of those that Hamas know precisely where they are in terms of their burial sites. But the only guarantee that they have is that and nothing else. After this, they're expected to disband. We're expecting a new Palestinian authority, in inverted commas, that will replace the current government of Palestine. And that is going to consist of technocrats, including the likes of Tony Blair. So Hamas is on a back foot, and we just don't know what's going to happen after this. Should Benjamin Netanyahu and his zealots, who are very keen on committing and continuing with this genocide, go back to square one, as they've done so many times in the past. So Hamas might release those hostages, but there are no guarantees that there will be a permanent ceasefire.
And given what you said then, in terms of not only timelines, but what happens next, those are clearly benchmarks, but could possibly be triggers on, whether this will genuinely go forth as a negotiation. And what are your thoughts on what will it take to achieve movement towards some sort of ceasefire, even if Hamas complies?
I think, by the way, we need to remember that this was not a war between Hamas and Israel. This was the attack on the innocent Palestinians by Israel.
Yes.
It was a one-sided, bombardment of the Palestinians and killing of civilians. The majority of the people that have been killed in these attacks have been women and children. So to say it's a war, it was not a war. It was a one-sided bombardment of innocent people. And I think what will happen henceforth is that Hamas will have to, unfortunately, disband, because I don't see anyone in the world, or government in the world, or any authority for that matter, in the Middle East dealing with Hamas, because everyone is under pressure to ensure that Hamas disbands. So Hamas finds itself in a much more complicated position. They might have to come up with a new outfit which will eventually compete for elections, both in Gaza and the West Bank. But I think in the absence of anything viable, they might just want to continue with their struggle, because they've got nothing to lose now. Even though, of course, they've had quite a knock in terms of their arsenal and weaponry, which has been depleted by Israelis, but they still can continue fighting and struggling. I think the only thing that we'll consider right now is the new strategy and tactic on how they wage their struggle. But the armed struggle, I don't think they'll survive or continue with that, given the destruction that Israel has committed both in Gaza and the West Bank. So they're in a much more complicated position, and they will have to rely on the Qataris and the Egyptians in terms of, making sure that Israel meet their obligations. But I doubt if Israel is going to meet the obligation. Benjamin Netanyahu is not, renegated from his commitment to destroy Hamas. So as long as Hamas is alive and around, particularly in Qatar and in Turkey, you are likely to have Israel continuing hunting them down.
And if I did use the word war, I would obviously withdraw that, because language is important in contextualizing and understanding the phase at which these talks are. So let's talk about enforcement mechanisms. Do we know and understand how that is going to be applied, and how will that also be reflected, particularly when you talk about humanitarian and financial support?
Well, the Americans are going to be involved. Donald Trump has appointed himself to be the chairperson of the so-called Board of Peace, which is the new platform that will see the transition and the reconstruction of Gaza. So given that, you are likely to have the Americans facilitating that, but people are going to be funding the project of reconstruction, and not all that goes with it. It's going to be mainly the Gulf countries led by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. That's where the money is going to be coming from. And Trump, of course, and his son-in-law, they're going to benefit in terms of business concessions. And Turkey is also, placing itself quite comfortably, including China and all other countries who are now looking at these opportunities. Sadly, of course, South Africa being far away, notwithstanding that we've done more than most countries, but I don't think we'll benefit from any of the contracts and tenders that are going to be coming out in terms of reconstruction of Gaza. So it's interesting times ahead, and I think in the next couple of hours we'll get to know exactly what will be the next steps. But we'll all have to wait and pray that Benjamin Netanyahu does not renegade and go back into bombarding Gaza once again.
But ultimately, I would imagine that for this to enjoy any kind of success, and depending from which prism you're looking at it, because there are the regional dynamics and there's the aspect of international law, is the issue around accountability. How is that being crafted in terms of the language around this peace deal or ceasefire deal?
Well, Israel does not respect international law. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, these two ultra-right-wing alliances of Benjamin Netanyahu, they've said it, that the international law applies to the rest, but the chosen people don't have to adhere to international law, meaning that Jewish people are not subject to international law. So they don't respect international law, and they'll continue doing as they please. I mean, they've violated every single law in the book. And for them, of course, the destruction and the cancellation of international law, including multilateralism, will serve them good, because in that situation, they can do as they please. Right now, the only instruments that hold them responsible and accountable for their crimes is international law, and they want to see that destroyed. And in fact, they were hoping that they were going to be expelled from the United Nations, both General Assembly and other platforms, so that they can, be free to do as they please. So I don't see them actually continuing or resuming the respect of any laws that govern all of us as a global community. I see them continuing with what they're doing, and hope, of course, that Donald Trump and the Americans will force the hands of the ICC, for example, to drop the cases against Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu, two of the culprits that are now charged with crimes against humanity, and also put pressure on those countries that have since joined the ICJ to drop that case. So that's the playbook of Israel at the moment.
In 30 seconds, what do you think the impact will be of this on media and narrative control?
I think it's going to be very difficult to control it in any way or form, given where we are at the moment in terms of the level of destruction. And, media was always prevented from coming in and reporting in Gaza and the West Bank. amongst other things. And I think right now we're in a situation where the level of destruction cannot be interpreted, translated, or explained by anyone. We will have to rewrite the rules and regulations on how to deal with rules of engagement in wars, because what Israel has done, the crimes that they've committed, they're unprecedented, and I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to even explain or put any definition to it.
All right. Tembisa Fakude, thank you very much for your time and your insights, much appreciated. He is an academic and researcher analysing the latest news announced by President Donald Trump of a ceasefire deal of sorts between Israel and Hamas.
Got something to say? Are you passionate about issues that matter? Do you have a voice that deserves to be heard? Well, we've got the perfect platform for you. Call in or drop us a WhatsApp on +27 63 406 9126. And we will call you back so you could have your say and be part of the conversation.
30 years of age. I just turned 30 on the 15th of November. So yeah, that's who I am, you know.
It's not just talk. It's your chance to air your views. Share your opinion. Engage with the community that values your perspective. Follow us on our social media. Visit our website at www.channelafrica.co.za and get ready to share your views on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
26 minutes past 9, we continue with Africa World Hour. This time we look at the third African Union Studies Annual Symposium underway in Johannesburg, South Africa, bringing together scholars, policymakers, diplomats and civil society leaders from across the continent and the diaspora, meeting under the theme The AU and the New Scramble for Africa, Conflict, Reparations and Resource Sovereignty. This year's gathering interrogates the shifting global contest for Africa's natural wealth and political influence. To speak to us about this, we're joined by the convener, Professor Adeoye Akinola from the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. A very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor. So as a convener, how does this year's theme move forward? How the AU has discussed this issue in the past, the new scramble for Africa, conflict, reparations and resource sovereignty, because it has been somewhat coming for the past couple of months.
Thank you so much. Of course, you rightly noted that this is not a new issue. But it's important to stress the fact that the African Union has taken the responsibility to put this on top of the agenda, not only for this year, as they have declared this year as the year for reparations, not just for continental Africa, but also people of African descent across the world. And they have also further declared the next 10 years as also years that have been dedicated to attain the realization of reparations for the ills of slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and also contemporary forms of imperialism, which many people will call neo-colonialism. So there's the consciousness across Africa and the diaspora that the time have come for Africa and its people to make a demand for reparative justice.
And when we speak about reparative justice, what is going on at the moment, given the hard knocks that Africa is paying for, given their own national interests in the face of, if we look at the trade war, so to speak, that has been initiated by President Donald Trump, would that form part of it, given that even some of his overtures to end the conflicts on the continent is about acquiring those natural resources and pretty much forcing some African countries into it?
Thank you so much. And that's the first thing for people to understand is the meaning of reparations, or what do people think that reparations is all about. Reparative justice is not all about begging for money. I think it's important for Africa and its partners across the globe to know that Africans are not begging for money. They are not begging for aid. It's not a favor that they are demanding for. They are actually demanding for something they see as a legitimate claim, particularly for the development of Africa. And as you have noted across many African society, particularly resource-wealthy society, that those society have been involved in conflict since independence in many cases. And those conflicts are not just conflicts caused by maybe ethnic or the nationality questions. They have actually been driven by aggressive resource exploitation by the global powers. And when we are talking about reparations, as you also mentioned the case of the United States, of course, we know that there are some state actors from the global north that are also trying to intimidate many African countries, perhaps to also dissuade them from pursuing the quest for reparations. But we also know that the cause for reparations and who perhaps to respond to the quest for reparations, not just state actors, and we also have all form of non-state actors that have been involved in diplomating, the disempowerment of Africa for the past 400 years. So when we are talking speaking to many companies that have exploited Africans, that have possibly stolen their resources over the ages. So for my expectation is African leaders will try to resist the diplomatic bullying from some global powers and lay their claim on what we know is a legitimate call for some redress because of the past injustices that lasted for more than 400 years.
Now, as the conversation continues under the current geopolitical crises, how is decolonial scholarship contributing to the understanding of the positioning of African countries within the context of the global south, what they're choosing to do in, especially when you're talking about the ownership of these natural resources, the stance that they're choosing and how it will impact on, as you say, the understanding, categorization of natural resources.
Thank you. I think over the past years, the conversations around reparations, despite the fact that it has not been centralized by the African Union, has been top-down model or top-down approach. But over the past 1 year, we have seen across the continent, we have seen the momentum being generated from below. Civil society actors, or even ECOSOC, the African Union ECOSOC, have been involved in mobilizing the civil society communities so that they will have a grasp of reparations and also become part of the reparative movement across the continent. But when we talk about the global south, of course, global south, we can talk as if the global south is a unit, but of course it's not a unit, it's homogeneous with different interests, sometimes contradicting interests, but something that also converge all of these interests together is the experience they from slavery to colonialism and even neo-colonialism. And I think, as I've mentioned, the consciousness is alike now at this point in time, particularly when they also realize that there are hostility from the global north. I think they realize that the time has come for them to take the destiny in their hands and make a very, and be committed to the reparative movements. Or otherwise, some of the pegs they've been enjoying from the global south, global north, particularly from the United States, some of these elites and some of these countries are also losing now. So the question is, what do we stand to lose if we pursue reparations? And I think the opportunity has come, particularly because of the growing importance of African countries to the global political economy. And you can talk about the resources that Africa has. This is the time to use those resources to bargain and begin to also think of economic diplomacy, as the United States is currently doing now.
What does sovereignty then look like? And I'm thinking from a policy perspective if this is part of the AU's 2063 agenda. A lot of these countries have paramilitary forces from foreign countries helping to establish not only their legitimacy, but one could say to an extent ownership of their countries. And that's put in the most crude way, but it would be that given the authoritarianism that we're seeing, how would the AU or African countries approach this question?
Thank you so much. I think the starting point is also for us to understand the precarious position of the African Union. That is not a supranational organization with binding authority over state members. It operates differently from the European Union, for instance. But maybe as it's made, the African Union still has what it takes to begin to influence its member states to respond to this aggressive resource exploitation by some of the global powers. And as we have seen in the Sahel, for instance, we have seen situations where countries have outsourced their security to foreign powers, to some mercenaries, and people have talked about the presence of many foreign mercenary, foreign fighters in conflict zone in Africa. In Congo DRC, we saw that. And even in Mozambique, we have seen that. So when we talk about resource sovereignty, it's not just talking about the linking from interacting with global north or some of the multinational corporations, but what it means is just that Africa must take ownership of their resources. They should be able to determine the prices of their natural or mineral resources. They must be able to determine without diplomatic bullying who to relate with, who to trade with, for instance. And we have seen situations where the former colonial masters, as we have seen in the Sahel, have tried to bully some of the political elite into actually surrendering their resource sovereignty to some of the companies operating in those foreign former colonial powers. So the time has come for African political elites to take ownership of their resources and be able to strike any deal that is favorable and that is some relatively balanced. Unlike what we have seen, it has been asymmetric trade relations between Africa and the global north in particular, including China.
But that ownership and control means nothing if there's no equitable distribution of wealth. So what is the first step for African countries under the auspices of the AU to ensure that there is that genuine economic sovereignty for every citizen of Africa?
Thank you so much. And I was smiling because that's one of the theme of our conversation all through the day. So some of the speakers, participants were asking that even if Africa were to get the so-called reparations, particularly if it comes in form of monetary compensation, that there's no guarantee that those money will flow down to the common African on the streets, that there could be elite capture where the elite will just, accumulate whatever is being granted or is being disbursed to their countries. But for me, I think it's one step at a time. We cannot just fix everything in Africa at a time. Of course, it is important to address governance issue. It is important to be able to hold our political elite accountable. We have to start somewhere. So the question is, we don't also want to use this as an excuse to abandon the cause for reparations. Let's get reparations. And I know they have the intelligence, they have human capacity. And if Africa were to be left alone, they would have been able to resolve any internal dynamics amicably without actually using the instruments of coercion like guns and bullets. That is just my own approach to this question about can they manage reparations. I believe Africa can manage it.
Well, thank you so much for your time and insights, Professor Adeoye Akinola from the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation, bringing the time to just about 20 minutes to 10.
madapiri pazochitika. Madapiri pazochitika.
Mafuta galimoto akwera mtengo mdziko la Malawi ndipo nkhani anthu ayilandira mosiyanasiyana ndipo mtolankhani nzathu mdziko la Malawi Kondwani Nyamasauka tili naye pa line pano kuti atifotokozere zambiri. Kondwani, kodi uli bwanji? Mafuta galimoto kodi akwera kufika pa bwanji?
Mafuta galimoto akwera amene tuyankhula pano kukambonena kuti usiku wathawu petrol wakwera kuchokera pa 2,530 kwacha kukafika pa 3,499 kwacha. Kuma nkhani ya mapercentage ndi 38.30%, pamene diesel wachoka pa 2,734 kwacha kukafika pa 3,500 kwacha, yomwe ikuyimira kuma percentage 28.02%.
Zochitika pa nthawi ya 6 koloko kufikira 7 koloko madzulo. Lolemba mpaka lachisanu ndi Madapiri.
1 hour, 1 continent, 1 voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And we continue with Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African perspective. And for our 2140 feature today, we talk about something that has been considered, labeled, in fact, controversial in some sections of society. But we look at it from the prism of what is World Mental Health Day tomorrow. So we thought we'd take the conversation in a different direction, but it's within this realm. And we look at conversations around gender, health and human rights, how they're evolving. But in many spaces, access to sexual and reproductive health services and gender affirming care still face stigma, misinformation, and of course policy gaps. So tonight, we speak to a mother, a former health professional whose journey alongside her non-binary child offers a window into what it really means to love, to listen, and to advocate in a society still learning to understand gender diversity. So from navigating family conversations to confronting medical and social systems not yet fully equipped for inclusivity, her story helps us to unpack what gender-affirming healthcare really looks like, not in theory but in practice. We're joined now by Dr. Marianne Stevens, a leading voice in sexual and reproductive justice and a former member of the World Health Organization's Gender Advisory Panel. Dr. Stevens, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for allowing us to speak to you. I'd like to start with your story as a mother. When you first began to understand that your child identified outside of the traditional gender binary, and what emotions or thought that evoked for you and for your child?
Well, good evening, Tsepiso and your team, and thank you for inviting me and for having a conversation on these issues. So the way I really perform gender myself is not very, very stereotypical, and I was the kind of person that got married by surprise and then had children by surprise and wasn't too sure what to do at kitchen teas and at baby showers. And so when we had our children, I had a lens of kind of seeing and knowing that gender was a bit of a performance about how boys are supposed to be or how girls are supposed to be. So my children both had kind of blondish textured curly hair, and I was the kind of person that when people gave me gifts, I said, please don't give me pastels. I don't like pastels. Can you give me bright colors? And so I started to observe people's reaction to my choices. And so I was like getting questions like, what is your child? Is your child, before they were even conscious of it. And then I started to see them being pleased. And I guess it was how we are as a family. I didn't see my child as so separate from me in those early days. And I got very concerned about how my child was being pleased in what they were supposed to play with, what colors they were supposed to wear. And so, for example, one time my partner came back from a trip in London, and there'd been a sale at Gap, and they'd bought like a pinkish cerise shirt, and so our child went off to preschool with the shirt because they loved the color and because we bought it. And then they came home, and the teacher actually said to us, "Why is your child wearing that shirt?" And then the teacher started to say, like, "What are you doing with your child's hair?" Like, so I realized that gender as a parent was going to be a long journey, even before my youngest child, started to explore a gender that was not the gender that they were assigned at birth.
So the fact that you're a nonconformist in terms of what society expects of you and how to express that, do you believe that's what helped your child to express their thoughts, their feelings about their being non-binary? And I know it's a subject of conversation, and even to the other extreme, I'm seeing it on social media, the cancel Netflix culture, because of what people are saying. It's being too open that makes children think it's okay.
So, I think that we come from a very particular history in South Africa where we have been socialized to read race and gender in a way that comes with enormous amount of pain and reflection. And so I am curiously aware of the import that has happened because of these contestations in the global north. And it's unfortunate that they've landed in South Africa in this way, because I don't believe that we had these kinds of concerns and contradictions, in our early days. For example, gender affirming healthcare was performed in the 70s in South Africa with nobody batting an eyelid. There's a very famous, actually, Republican model that lives in Texas, who is like almost in her 80s, that was operated on in South Africa in Durban before they left. So it's a very strange thing. And the other thing that is quite clear is that in pre-colonial societies within our region, the historians tell us that gender was a continuum and it was not policed. And for many people who have had the calling, there were also ways of expressing their gender through their calling and their practices, their cultural practices that were normalized.
I'm so glad that you referred to, your own professional history, particularly within South Africa. And you would have studied apartheid era conditions before and post-democracy around medical anthropology. So the South African Human Rights Commission recently emphasizing the constitutional right to dignity and access to gender-affirming healthcare. Have there been any notable changes, and particularly given the fact that South Africa went through institutionalized discrimination?
Well, absolutely. And you know that, one of the very painful paths that we have in South Africa is that the military actually weaponized issues of gender and sexual orientation. And, we're very conscious of what's happening with the genocide in Palestine at the moment. And I think they kind of practice those techniques of terror and torture in South Africa. Both had significant years in 1948. And we started with, we still have a man that's walking around in our cities, in our shopping malls called Wouter Basson, who practiced all kinds of very concerning methods, exploring remote control fertility vaccines to conversion therapy. And that, as a health provider who trained in the 80s, early 80s, that's something that I saw. I trained at a regional hospital in the Western Cape in Wynberg, and I have a stark memory. I trained when I was quite young. At 17, seeing somebody that had escaped from Wynberg Military Hospital with a botched gender sex assignment. And clearly this person was being experimented upon. And it left a lasting impression on me in terms of that the military was just nuts. You know, what on earth were they doing experimenting with surgeries on this person? And so this is our legacy and history, where we come from a place, a very dark place, and to have the Human Rights Commission take these issues on under the leadership of Chris Nissen, who is deeply committed to issues of non-discrimination and human rights, where we're starting to see leadership in policy statements on legal recognition, on access to education, and on safety and security, and then on healthcare. So these are really important public spaces where transitioning can start happening. It's not only within, you know, a health clinic that gender affirming healthcare takes place. It's actually in a wider context.
So fast forward to now, your child, and especially when you're talking about spatial rights, I'm curious how, you know, conversations that have become misinformation, particularly around gender identity, gender diversity, have translated in the environment we're in now. You're also speaking, and I'm thinking about it, the differences between a township and suburbs, how that also impacts on a child who makes the choice that they're expressing themselves as non-binary.
So indeed, I mean, the experiences of gender diverse and transgender children and individuals, you know, in South Africa are as different as we all are in our different spaces. And I, you know, speaking from my experience, from, you know, observing and understanding colleagues, and also from my own child, you know, we unfortunately have had this imposition of concern and disinformation from the global north, and it's been catapulted in, you know, Trump's first executive order that he signed on the 25th of January, and I looked this up because I'm writing something at the moment. It was the first one that he signed, was a denial of transgender identities and referring to gender as an ideology. Now, how does this land in South Africa, where we have a completely different approach, even amongst all of our differences in how we view each other, and we see each other as human beings and humanize each other? And so, you know, some of the concerns and complexities that are imported are just quite bizarre. You know, the global north is concerned about toilets and bathrooms and safety of bathrooms. Well, we've got a water and sanitation issue, and please, can we just all have toilets in schools, full stop? So you can't just kind of translate these issues from the north to the south. We have very, very different contexts. The issues around, you know, school uniforms. Well, we know that there's a monopoly on school uniforms, and school uniforms are very expensive. And so we just need children to be able to access and be warm and comfortable, and you know, to be able to have desks in schools. The kinds of issues that are of concern are really, you know, quite, you know, they're not really issues in South Africa. what has become imported, which is very, very concerning, is resistance to comprehensive sexuality education, which we know in South Africa covers a whole continuum of issues around, being able to name emotions and feelings, talk about your body parts, know the different parts of your body. So if you are under threat, you can actually be specific when you can say something or something to a health provider or to an adult if you need care. And then at a later stage, talking about contraception or issues of sexual and reproductive health. But comprehensive sexuality education is being framed by the kind of global evangelical churches and then importing into our churches that it's about gender ideology and it's taking parents' rights away. And, so I think it's really important to listen very closely to how we are being influenced
and how we frame these issues. Dr. Stevens, I need to, as a final question, because you are talking about it, especially from a global perspective, you were on the WHO's gender panel, and I'm thinking about support mechanisms, the type of insight that you were able to give to them. As a medical health professional, when you speak about how, this is extended to help those with gender identity considerations, when you and I spoke at some point, we spoke about pubic blockers, and I'm just wondering how those interventions are understood and are practically implemented, and most importantly, the impact of mental health as well.
Yeah. So within South Africa, I'm going to talk about what's happening here. When young people explore transitioning from, pre-puberty, the kinds of interventions that are happening are really about supporting their mental health. And that's what happened with me we made sure that we reached out to health professionals who could support me and my partner and my child and my family in how to come alongside them and assist them in a very hostile environment where there's stigma, discrimination, labeling. Children come to school and they're very cruel and they don't know, aren't given language, they don't understand. And so then, you need to doubly equip your children to be able to understand what's going on and to protect themselves. So the first line of transitioning really is about a social support. And there's so many NGOs and organizations that folks should really reach out to, parent groups, in understanding this. We're not really talking about puberty blockers anymore. I've been unschooled and relearned that we're talking about them as puberty pauses, because these generally happen when an adolescent reaches puberty, and very few children actually end up accessing this. But if it is indicated after thorough workup with the family, the child, possibly even and the range of different health providers, whether it's an endocrinologist or the GP or the psychiatrist, they will then be given this hormone. And what I want to emphasize is this is not a strange new treatment. We've been using puberty blockers or puberty pauses, and I want to emphasize this is entirely reversible. You can stop it and your puberty will then start. If you have a reproductive cancer, or if you've got a condition called precocious puberty. And so that is what you would have. And this is very valuable for, adolescents who are starting to get those rapid changes that would be devastating. So, for example, for a young trans girl, if their voice starts going deeper, if they're getting facial hair, if they get their Adam's apple, you want to kind of prevent that from making them feel completely dislocated from their body and hating the changes. So just to pause and to wait. And then at a later stage, after an assessment, they will then be provided with hormones. But this only really happens at a much later stage.
Dr.
So I think a lot of the concern is quite misplaced because this is a very well considered safe treatment.
Dr. Stevens, thank you so much. I think this deserves so much lengthier conversation, and perhaps with several other participants as well, but a very important subject, and we really do value your insights. Much, much appreciated. Dr. Marion Stevens reminding us that justice in health care is not just about access, it's about affirmation, respect, and the courage to hold systems accountable to the people.
Thank you. Have a good evening. I can leave.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stevens. And that brings us to the end of Africa World Hour. Shayla Ndukumana joining us.
Oh, goodness.
Yes.
I love that.
I love that too. It's such a fascinating conversation about public health care, dignity, legal, ethical rights, but most importantly around the issue of gender norms, societal norms of gender assignation, but also, gender identity.
Yeah.
And her conversation around medical anthropology in South Africa, how these things were happening decades ago, which are becoming tops of conversation in the US now. It's wow.
I was fascinated by the very last remarks there, just making an example of a child who's transforming a transgender girl or boy, and them going through their process. And I was thinking of the culture aspect, right? So maybe your parents have accepted it, but what of the community and how they would treat you? And I think sometimes we forget that these caregivers, these healthcare practitioners are part of this community, and we tend to fall short in that understanding. Nevertheless, listen, we stick to children. Yes. So did you know that in Australia, they have passed the law to omit children under the age of 16 on social media?
Interesting.
I've got concerns.
What is the motive behind it? Is it protection?
Yes, primarily protection. And this, of course, fueling organizations such as the South African National Association of School Governing Bodies, who are looking to remove smartphones from education. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think as with every law, not only are there pros and cons, but it's about the efficacy thereof. Gen Z, we know. You don't tell them what to do. They'll find ways around it. I think the most important part is to deal with the problematic areas and tighten the regulation of use in certain spaces. And also, I think a lot of the time when people come up with these bright ideas, they take away the accountability of parents, because parents sometimes don't parent, but the spaces that even public spaces, they themselves, they don't have the level of stricture that we need. But if you stop a child from doing something, they'll find a way of doing it.
I could easily say I'm 18 on a social media app, right? Secondly, when you're purchasing a phone, you're not purchasing it as the 12, 13-year-old. It's your parents. It's under your parents' name. So according to the model and the body of this phone, it belongs to a 34, 35, 37-year-old. And so how do we then begin to put restrictions that haven't... It's almost like we've left part of the process out. I mean, this is just me thinking off the top of my mind. But I also do think that there is a culture block, similar to what I was telling you about when it comes to healthcare and different experiences thereof, right? It is that we want children to learn in the formal ways, but we're in a new age.
Yeah,
we're in a completely different world.
The conversations have moved, the lives that we live. Hey, thank you, Tina, let's close the show. Well, that's it from Africa World. Shayla Njukumana is up next.